Good evening. You are listening to Rock Soul Radio. It's about 8 o'clock, and we're going to go ahead and get this Wednesday's Weird Story thing kicked off. Now, if you've been listening in for the past few weeks, you know that this is a weekly event that we're dipping back into the archives of Gothic horror, pulp fiction, and all of that good old-timey short stories that had your great-great-grandparents spooked out and that kind of stuff. So if you're into that kind of thing, this is definitely the place that you're going to want to be. We're going to be tapping into a lot of authors like Edgar Allan Poe, like tonight. H.P. Lovecraft, we love his works. We're also going to be tapping into some other authors that I find along the way as well. So if you have suggestions, if you have an idea for a particular story that you'd like to hear, definitely hit me up on the Facebook page at Rocked Soul Radio. It's ROCKDSOUL Radio. And let me know that you've been enjoying the stories and that you've got some suggestions as well. If you haven't, if this is your first time tuning in, welcome. Love to have you here. And if you want to catch up, there is an archive of all of the past stories over at podcast.rockedsoulradio.com. That links right over to the Podbean page, and you can see the 5 stories that we have up there already. A couple by Lovecraft, one by Mary Shelley, and we even did a holiday story by Hans Christian Andersen for that Christmas holiday that just passed a little bit ago. So if the Wednesdays fall close to a major holiday, you can assume that I'm probably going to try to find something that taps in with that. But for tonight, no major holidays. We're looking at dipping back into the world of Edgar Allan Poe, and we're going all the way back to 1846 tonight, was the year that this story got first published and again, a lot of these short stories were published not necessarily on their own, but as collections of stories in some of these literary journals and magazines and periodicals that were coming out at the time. And some of them were received with phenomenal critical acclaim. Others, like last week with Mary Shelley's story, I love the story. I think it's really cool, but the critics didn't like it at all. So, it's kind of hit or miss as far as critical acclaim, but all of these have a nice little spooky touch to them. And some of them, like tonight, they're just savage. The wording and the kind of the pace of it doesn't seem necessarily brutal or horrifying, but when you think about what's actually going on in the story and when you get through to the end of it, you realize that not only was Poe, pretty savage, but he wrote his characters to be some harsh MRFers. So that's something to keep in mind for tonight. Tonight we're going to be going through the Cask of Amontillado, or Amontillado, however you want to pronounce that. So that is one of his kind of later stories. The guy died in 1849. He was only like 40 years old. So with this coming out in 1846, this was kind of at the pinnacle of his career, but also pretty damn close to the end of his life too. So there wasn't a whole lot of time left for him to be kicking out some stories, but the man managed to do so. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into our story for this evening. Again, this is Wednesday's Weird Stories here on Rocked Soul Radio, your home for Chicago's best independent music and spooky, spooky stories. The Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe. The 1,000 injuries of Fortunado I had borne as best I could, but when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. You, who so well know the nature of my soul, will not suppose, however, that I gave an utterance to a threat. At length I would be avenged. This was a point definitively settled. but the very definitiveness with which it was resolved precluded the idea of risk. I must not only punish, but punish with impunity. A wrong is unredressed when retribution overtakes its redresser. It is equally unredressed when the avenger fails to make himself felt as such to him who has done the wrong. It must be understood that neither by word nor deed had I given Fortunado cause to doubt my goodwill. I continued, as was my wont, to smile in his face, and he did not perceive that my smile now was at the thought of his immolation. He had a weak point, this Fortunado, although in other regards he was a man to be respected and even feared. He prided himself on his connoisseurship in wine. Few Italians have the true virtuoso spirit. For the most part their enthusiasm is adopted to suit the time and opportunity, to practice imposture upon the British and Austrian millionaires. In painting and gemmery, Fortunato, like his countrymen, was a quack. But in the matter of old wines he was sincere. In this respect I did not differ from him materially. I was skillful in the Italian vintages myself, and bought largely whenever I could. It was about dusk one evening, during the supreme madness of the carnival season, that I encountered my friend. He accosted me with excessive warmth, for he had been drinking much. The man wore motley. He had on tight-fitting party-striped dress, and his head was surmounted by the conical cap and bells. I was so pleased to see him that I thought I should never have done wringing his hand. I said to him, "My dear Fortunato, you are luckily met. How remarkably well you are looking today. But I have received a pipe of what passes for Amontillado, and I have my doubts." "How?" said he. "Amontillado? A pipe? Impossible! And in the middle of the carnival?" "I have my doubts," I replied, "and I was silly enough to pay the full Amontillado price, without consulting you in the matter. You were not to be found, and I was fearful of losing a bargain." "Amontillado?" "I have my doubts." "Amontillado!" "And I must satisfy them." "Amontillado!" "As you are engaged, I am on my way to Lucchesi. If anyone has a critical turn, it is he. He will tell me." "Lucchesi cannot tell Amontillado from sherry." "And yet some fools will have it that his taste is a match for your own." "Come, let us go." "Whither?" "To your vaults." "My friend, no, I will not impose upon your good nature. I perceive that you have an engagement. Lucchesi—" "I have no engagement. Come." "My friend, no. It is not the engagement, but the severe cold with which I perceive you are afflicted. The vaults are insufferably damp. They are encrusted with nitre." "Let us go, nevertheless. The cold is merely nothing, Amontillado. You have been imposed upon, and as for Lucchesi, he cannot distinguish sherry from Amontillado." Thus speaking, Fortunato possessed himself of my arm, putting on a mask of black silk and drawing a roquelaire closely about my person. I suffered him to hurry me to my palazzo. There were no attendants at home. They had absconded to make merry in the honor of the time. I had told them that I should not return until the morning, and had given them explicit orders not to stir from the house. These orders were sufficient, I well knew, to ensure that their immediate disappearance, once and all, as soon as my back was turned. I took from their sconces 2 flambeaux, and giving one to Fortunato, bowed him through several suites of rooms to the archway that led into the vaults. I passed down a long and winding staircase, requesting him to be cautious as he followed. We came at length to the foot of the descent, and stood together on the damp ground of the catacombs of the Montresors. The gait of my friend was unsteady, and the bells upon his cap jingled as he strode. "The pipe?" said he. "It is farther on," said I, "but observe the white webwork which gleams from these cavern walls." He turned toward me and looked into my eyes with 2 filmy orbs that distilled the rheum of intoxication. "Nitre?" he asked at length. "Nitre," I replied. "How long have you had that cough?" My poor friend found it impossible to reply for many minutes. "It is nothing," he said at last. "Come," I said, with decision, "we will go back. Your health is precious. You are rich, respected, admired, beloved. You are happy, as once I was. You are a man to be missed. For me it is no matter. We will go back. You will be ill, and I cannot be responsible. Besides, there is Lucchesi." "Enough," he said. "The cough is a mere nothing, and it will not kill me. I shall not die of a cough." "True, true," I replied. "And indeed, I had no intention of alarming you unnecessarily, but you should use all proper caution. A draught draught of this medic will defend us from the damps. Here I knocked off the neck of a bottle, which I drew from a long row of its fellows that lay upon the mold. "Drink," I said, presenting him the wine. He raised it to his lips with a leer. He paused and nodded to me familiarly, while his bells jingled. "I drink," he said, "to the buried that repose around us." "And I to your long life." He again took my arm, and we proceeded. "These vaults," he said, "are extensive." "The Montresors," I replied, "were a great and numerous family." "I forgot your arms." "A huge human foot d'or in a field azure. The foot crushes a serpent rampant whose fangs are embedded in the heel." "And the motto?" "Nemo me impune lacessit." "Good," he said. The wine sparkled in his eyes and the bells jingled. My own fancy grew warm with the medic. We had passed through walls of piled bones with casks and puncheons intermingling, and into the inmost recesses of the catacombs. I paused again, and this time I made bold to seize Fortunado by an arm above the elbow. "The nitre," I said. "See, it increases. It hangs like moss upon the vaults. We are below the river's bed. The drops of moisture trickle among the bones. Come, we'll go back ere it is too late. Your cough." "It is nothing," he said. "Let us go on. But first another draught of the medic." I broke and reached him a flagon of decribe. He emptied it at a breath. His eyes flashed with a fierce light. He laughed and threw the bottle upward with a gesticulation I did not understand. I looked at him in surprise. He repeated the movement, a grotesque one. "You do not comprehend?" he said. "Not I," I replied. "Then you are not of the Brotherhood?" "How? You are not of the Masons?" "Yes, yes," I said. "Yes, yes." "You? Impossible! A Mason?" "A Mason," I replied. "A sign," he said. "It is this," I answered, producing a trowel from beneath the folds of my roquelaire. "You jest," he exclaimed, recoiling a few paces. "But let us proceed to the Amontillado." "Be it so," I said, replacing the tool beneath the cloak, and again offering him my arm. He leaned upon it heavily. We continued our route in search of the Amontillado. We passed through a range of low arches, descended, passed on, and descending again, arrived at a deep crypt, in which the foulness of the air caused our flambeaux rather to glow than flame. At the most remote end of the crypt there appeared another less spacious. Its walls had been lined with human remains, piled to the vault overhead, in the fashion of the great catacombs of Paris. 3 sides of this interior crypt were still ornamented in this manner. From the 4th the bones had been thrown down, and lay promiscuously upon the earth, forming at one point a mound of some size. Within the wall thus exposed by the displacing of the bones, we perceived a still interior recess, in depth about 4 feet, in width 3, in height 6 or 7. It seemed to have been constructed for no special use within itself, but formed merely the interval between 2 of the colossal supports of the roof of the catacombs, and was backed by one of their circumscribing walls of solid granite. It was in vain that Fortunado, uplifting his dull torch, endeavored to pry into the depth of the recess. Its termination the feeble light did not enable us to see. "Proceed," I said. "Herein is the Amontillado." "As for Lucchese, he is an ignoramus," interrupted my friend as he stepped unsteadily forward, while I followed immediately at his heels. In an instant he had reached the extremity of the niche, and finding his progress arrested by the rock, stood stupidly bewildered. A moment more, and I had him fettered to the granite. In its surface were 2 iron staples, distant from each other about 2 feet horizontally. From one of these depended a short chain, from the other a padlock. Throwing the links about his waist, it was but the work of a few seconds to secure it. He was much too astounded to resist. Withdrawing the key, I stepped back from the recess. "Pass your hand," I said, "over the wall. You cannot help feeling the nitre. It is indeed very damp. Once more, let me implore you to return. No? Then I must positively leave you. But I must first render you all the little attentions in my power." "The Amontillado!" ejaculated my friend, not yet recovered from his astonishment. "True," I replied, "the Amontillado." As I said these words, I busied myself among the pile of bones of which before I had spoken. Throwing them aside, I soon uncovered a quantity of building stone and mortar. With these materials, and with the aid of my trowel, I began vigorously to wall up the entrance of the niche. I had scarcely laid the first tier of the masonry when I discovered that the intoxication of Fortunado had in a great measure worn off. The earliest indication I had of this was a low moaning cry from the depth of the recess. It was not the cry of a drunken man. There was then a long and obstinate silence. I had laid the second tier, and the third, and the fourth, and then I heard the furious vibrations of the chain. The noise lasted for several minutes, during which, that I might hearken to it with more satisfaction, I ceased my labors and sat down upon the bones. When at last the clanking subsided, I resumed the trowel, and finished without interruption the fifth, sixth, and seventh tier. The wall was now nearly upon a level with my breast. I again paused, and holding the flambeau over the mason-work, threw a few feeble rays upon the figure within. A succession of loud and shrill screams, bursting suddenly from the throat of the chained form, seemed to thrust me violently back. For a brief moment I hesitated. I trembled. Unsheathing my rapier, I began to grope with it about the recess, but the thought of an instant reassured me. I placed my hand upon the solid fabric of the catacombs, and felt satisfied. I reapproached the wall. I replied to the yells of him who clamored. I re-echoed. I aided. I surpassed them in volume and in strength. I did this, and the clamor grew still. It was now midnight, and my task was drawing to a close. I had completed the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th tier. I had finished a portion of the last and the 11th. There remained but a single stone to be fitted and plastered in. I struggled with its weight. I placed it partially in its destined position. But now there came from out of the niche a low laugh that erected the hairs upon my head. It was succeeded by a sad voice, which I had difficulty in recognizing as that of the noble Fortunado. The voice said, "Ha, ha, ha, a very good joke indeed, an excellent jest. We will have many a rich laugh about it at the palazzo. Over our wine." "The Amontillado," I said. Yes, the Amontillado, but it is not getting late. Will not they be awaiting us at the palazzo? The Lady Fortunado and the rest? Let us be gone." "Yes," I said, "let us be gone." "For the love of God, Montresor!" "Yes," I said, "for the love of God." But to these words I hearkened in vain for a reply. I grew impatient. I called aloud, "Fortunado?" No answer. I called again, "Fortunado!" No answer still. I thrust a torch through the remaining aperture and let it fall within. There came forth in reply only a jingling of the bells. My heart grew sick, on account of the dampness of the catacombs. I hastened to make an end of my labor. I forced the last stone into its position. I plastered it up. Against the new masonry I re-erected the old rampart of bones. For the half of a century no mortal has disturbed them. In pace requiescant. Now, if that's not some savage stuff there by Montresor, I don't know what is. To just lead the guy who, obviously had been doing him wrong and had been giving him some crap for quite some time, to lead him down into these catacombs and literally just seal him up into the walls. That's hardcore. So there you go. That is the Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe, and that dude's ghost, I'm sure, is still haunting those catacombs down there, as are probably all of the catacombs crazily haunted. So, how'd you like that? Hopefully you enjoyed that as much as I did. We'll be putting that up on the archives soon, and I put up a little contest, if you will. Did you catch the dad joke in that story? I don't think anybody's posted up on Facebook yet, so if you were listening, the dad joke was up there around the whole talk of mason work, or whether or not Montresor was a mason. Fortunado's talking about, is he part of the Brotherhood of Masons, the secret society, all of that hoo-ha. Montresor gives him a little hint of what's to come by producing the trowel that he later sealed him up with, says, "Yeah, I'm a Mason. Look, here's my trowel right here." So that was a nice little what I thought was a nice little dad joke that Poe threw in there, and that's the kind of humor I like. Little throwing little things like that in there. Oh, Mason, yeah, I'm about to build a brick wall with you inside it. So there you go, buddy. All right, let's wrap it up for tonight then. That is all we have for you for our Wednesday's Weird Story. Again, if you are enjoying these and you want to make sure that you can keep up to date on them, if you miss it on Wednesday, follow the podcast at podcast.rocksoulradio.com. I'll take you to the Podbean page where you can find the stories that are already posted. You can like, share, and follow there to make sure that you get an email and a little notification when new stories are posted. And there's a whole bunch of other great podcasts on Podbean too, so I'm sure you will find tons and tons and tons of stuff to amuse and entertain you. In the meantime, we have more music on Rock Soul Radio, 24/7 stream of the best in Chicago's independent music and all of that good stuff. So we'll wrap up. Thank you very much for tuning in to Wednesday's Weird Stories. For those that are hearing this on the podcast, I'm talking to you in the future now. Thank you very much for tuning in. Hope you give us a like on the Podbean page, subscribe, give us some feedback, let me know how things are going, and if you like the stories. All right. With that, we'll call it a good night and get you back to the music on Rock Soul Radio, your home for Chicago's best independent music.